Hi, I'm Patricia Zehentmayr. I am the bookwriter and lyricist for the new musical, The Path to Catherine. If you want to hear more about this three-woman sung-through pop rock show, please listen to the conversation that's forthcoming. My parents tell these stories about how I was mesmerized by theater when I was a baby. Like they have a story about when I was 9 months old and they took me to see this play. And it was a children's play. And when the witch walked off the stage, I said, "Ba," which is basta. And they were so stunned because they thought I wouldn't be following anything. I still can't do, I don't know if a 9-month-old can follow, but they tell that story. And then they tell another story about when I was 18 months and they took me to see a ballet of Peter Rabbit and how I became like stock still and I didn't move and I was mesmerized for the entire ballet. And that was not usual for me because I was a very active baby. And it's not that they wanted to raise a child to be in theater at all. So I don't remember a time that I wasn't. I never saw a stage that I didn't want to be on when I was little. But by the time I was in my early 20s, it had totally passed. I had no desire to ever be on stage again, which was so strange because it had been all I wanted for all my life up until that point. I think the theater is such a powerful format for the very reasons that those stories my parents tell about me as a baby. I didn't act that way when I saw television. And there's something about live human people all being together in the same place at the same time that the actors, yes, and all the people supporting the actors, but the audience too. It's a shared experience. And it reaches people on a level that there's not that distance that you have with television or movies where you can walk away and come back and they're still talking. They're not there. You're not living it. It's like taking a picture of the food in a restaurant. You can't eat the picture of the food. It might look beautiful, but you can't eat it. And I think of television and movies as being a bit like that. It's a representation of, whereas theater, it's still a representation of, but it's much closer to your living, breathing, visceral experience that even babies get, much less a child, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old. I just think it reaches people in a way that nothing else does. Well, for me, the first thing I did as a child was dance. And I just danced all the time. That was my thing. And everything was about singing and dancing and acting. And to me, those things were all one thing. And I think that was about storytelling. I was always, my poor parents and neighbors, I was always putting on these dance shows. I didn't write plays. I didn't use language. And then the dancing, I went to an arts high school and you had to choose a major and you could only do the one thing. It was the Booker T. Washington High School of Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, Texas. And so I was a dance major, but as soon as I turned 16, I started working professionally as an actor, singer, and dancer. And Dallas is a great place to get started, especially then in the 80s, because there was enough work that I could get experience, but it wasn't such a competitive market that I couldn't compete like New York or LA would have been. So I was able to do a lot of television and film and theater, musicals, industrials were still being done at that time. And I went from dancing, which was, everything I wanted to do. But as I got to be about 16 or 17, I always wanted to speak and not just use my body. And that then became why I then moved a little more over to acting. And then I moved here to Los Angeles. I had a movie coming out, and I was a student at UT Austin, but I came out here, transferred to UCLA. I was still working as an actor. And then it was a little bit the same as how the dance made me want to speak. When I was doing all that acting work, I felt like a puppet, and I wanted to say my words, my own words. And that I was very frustrated with acting. And then that is what led me to writing songs. I didn't write plays, I wrote songs. And that's really was my thing for years and years, is just, I'm a songwriter. And then I had fallen in love with musical theater as a child. And I never knew how you would go about writing it. And then I heard about a workshop here in Los Angeles, which at the time was called Academy for New Musical Theater. Now it's called New Musicals, Inc. And that was where I met other writers. And then I began writing lyrics, only lyrics for musicals. And I wrote, I think, 3 or 4 full-length musicals just as a lyricist. And that led to, musicals are a really long commitment, really long. I'm sure you've heard that it takes, 5 to 8 years to start a musical and then get it to its final point where you freeze it. And I guess it was, again, now that I'm saying it, the same progression of, I didn't want to just write lyrics to somebody else's, to another book writer's show, to their concept, because it's such a commitment. And I just started having this feeling that I should write my own show, although I really didn't want to be a book writer. I really thought, I'm not a playwright. I have no idea what I'm doing. The book is the hardest part to get right of a musical. And it's so thankless, and it doesn't look like any fun. Music is fun. It's always fun to write music. But book writing just seemed to me like a chore. But then all the book writers who came to me with, asking me to write lyrics for their shows, I just couldn't get behind any of them, knowing it was going to be the commitment I had learned. Some of my shows I've 5, 10, 8 years I've been working on. And I started thinking I should write a show about a tiny show, maybe a show about women, but I wasn't sure what. And then I read Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan Quartet. And I was so inspired by the passion and the commitment she had to writing four novels about these women's friendship. It covers their friendship from the time they're like maybe 6 years old until they're in their 70s. And their relationship is very, very complex, and it reflects so much of the society they live in, their family dynamics. It is not sentimental at all, because there are a lot of books written that are sort of in the chick lit category, which I like chick lit. It's a lot of fun. But those kind of women's friendships are often very idealized and sentimentalized, like they're best friends, and she always knows what I'm thinking, and she finishes my sentences, and she's always supportive, and she, that kind of friendship that is nice, but it's not very interesting to me. And I thought, reading Elena Ferrante's work, I thought I could write a show about the intensity of women's relationships. That's what I should be writing about. That's something I can get behind. And I thought I should write a small show, because I don't know that I could keep track of a bunch of characters, because I had never written a book before. So I started casting about in my mind about what I could write about. And I love history. History really sparks my imagination. And I'm always frustrated that it's hard to find out what the lives of women were like in earlier days, because there don't exist many accounts. Maybe they do if you're a historian and you know how to get them, but for people who are not historians, what you read about are men and their lives and their decision making and their relationships and that kind of thing. And I thought, what if I write about some women from history? And I've done that before. I have a show called Mad Women that has features. We have characters of Zelda Fitzgerald, Camille Claudel, Queen Juana of Castile, Mary Todd Lincoln, and Vivian Leigh. And I thought about expanding one of those women's roles, but I couldn't. As I thought I could write about women who are friends. I could write about mother and daughter. I could write about sisters. I could write about an aunt and a niece. I could write about an unlikely friendship between two women who are at disparate ages and disparate walks of lives, and somehow they become friends. I thought of a lot of things. And then I started really leaning towards history, writing about somebody from history. And it was hard for me to find women like, say, Queen Juana of Castile and her mother, Queen Isabella. It was hard for me to get the women in the same place at the same time when the daughter wasn't a child. And I didn't want to write about a child. And then I remembered I had read a book in 7th grade about Catherine the Great. And it's the only thing I had ever read about Catherine the Great, because most of, in America, we don't read a lot about Russian history. We know European history. So I remembered her, and the book, I haven't even looked it up, but it was written for a young audience. And I'm sure that's the reason it was in my middle school library, was because they were trying to get books to make children interested in literature. And I was 12, and it was written probably for 12-year-olds. But I remembered that she was really young. And I thought, well, if was really young, she must have had parents, maybe her mother was on the scene. I didn't remember. So then I started researching that, and along the way discovered the Empress Elizabeth. And they were all in the same place for this very brief period of time, in the same place at the same time. They're all fascinating women, so interesting, all of them, and all of them at a critical moment in their lives where the decisions they make are going to change their lives forever, all of them. And I loved that. I loved those women. I loved the intensity of their relationships. I love the idea of, we have all absorbed so many stories, whether it's in theater or books or movies, where there's stories about all these things that men do, and there's no women present. Like the women don't exist. And I thought, what if I wrote a story and I took all the men out of it and just told it from the women's perspective? And it was really hard because there were tons of men involved. There were tons of people involved. So to weed out 90% of what was going on to get to these three women, to, chip all that other stuff away to find the story between these three, was really the job. That was the hardest part. And the whole time I was doing it, I still kept thinking, I'm going to do this in research, and then I'm going to give this to a book writer so the book writer can write the book, and then I can write the lyrics. And as I was doing the research, it just dawned on me that there was no way I could convey what I needed to convey to the book writer, because the story was forming in my mind, and it was just way too many, books, too many notes, too much stuff. And I realized it would be harder to convey that to somebody else than to just write the book. Just to write. And that's how that came about. I really was a bit of a kicking and screaming book writer. But then I wrote it really easily. I spent a lot of time on research, a lot of time on an outline. And then I gave myself 6 weeks to write the book because I thought I have to have a deadline because I have to make myself a deadline. And so I was like, oh, okay, 6 weeks. And I was so nervous because I thought I can't possibly achieve that, but I'm really going to try. And so I began to write the book as a play. And I wrote it in 3 days because by then I think it had all been so much in my internalized for maybe 6 months at that point, that it just came out very easily. And so then once did that, I knew of Jan Roper. I knew her work. We had maybe met. I knew what she looked like, and she'd worked with friends of mine. So I thought that she would be perfect for this. And so I asked Jan, and she agreed to work on it with me, which has been so great. She has been just the most wonderful collaborator. And then we decided we'd make it sung through. So then we began turning all the dialogue scenes into songs. And then we did that. We started that in September of 2019 was when Jan and I started working together. And then, the shutdown happened in March of 2020. So we kept writing. We finished on Halloween of 2020. And then we just kind of treaded water because it was sung through, we couldn't make use of a virtual platform. So we kind of just waited and waited. When we worked on it, we finessed some things. And then in the summer, there was a bit of a break in the COVID intensity, and we were able to get a reading. We did a reading at New Musicals, Inc. And it's so wonderful to finally see actors doing your work. So we did that, and that helped us get to the next step, which is the production we're doing now. A sung through musical, most musicals that are called book musicals, you write them generally as a play first, and then you find moments in the scene where the people would sing. And it's usually where they're so overcome with emotion that just talking isn't enough. So then they bring it up to song. A sung through is a little bit more like an opera in which everything even what would be dialogue is sung. So you may have a break here or there where a line is spoken, but for the most part, they're singing the whole time, such as Les Mis, Hamilton, Evita, Hadestown. Those are all sung through. So it's a lot of music, and it's a lot for the singers to learn. And since our show has 3 people, it is such a heavy lift for all 3 of them, which was also why we couldn't make use of a virtual platform, because Jan has to teach them the music in person. And we were still in a time when it was unsafe to meet in person. And you cannot send these singer actors a score such as ours and say, hey, just learn it on your own. It's just, that's not how it works. So the story of The Path to Catherine is Sophie is a teenager. Sophie will eventually become Catherine the Great, but her name is Sophie in our show because she's not yet become Catherine. She is German. She is a princess, but in Germany, there were many, 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 many princesses. She was not anything special as far as her rank, but her mother was very highly ranked, Joanna. But Joanna had married beneath her, so her rank had lowered. Joanna's very ambitious. And Joanna's brother had married the Empress Elizabeth's sister. So the Empress now needs an heir. She has chosen her dead sister's son to be her heir. His name is Peter. He's the grandson of Peter the Great. And he's obviously now, as a teenager, you can see that he is mentally unstable, like many people in that family who were mentally ill. And Elizabeth has realized he's not an heir. She needs him to have a son. So she needs to get him married. So she wants a family for herself since all of her family has died. So she invites Sophie and Joanna to come to Russia to be considered to be Peter's wife. There are many other princesses and other noble girls who could also be Peter's wife. It's not a given. So the entire show happens from January to May of 1744. And it's the three women's negotiating what they want and what they can get and what they can't get and how they're going about doing it. In the end, we all know that Sophie marries Peter, eventually overthrows him, and becomes Catherine the Great. Not in our show. And our show ends with Elizabeth making the decision that Sophie can marry Peter as long as Sophie agrees to send her mother home to never return. So Sophie has to choose, does she want her family or does she want to be close to power? We have an amazing cast. These women have to work so hard because it's 90 minutes of singing, and all three of them basically have about the same. They'll have about 30% of the show. And we have Elise Walters playing Sophie, the teenager who will become Catherine the Great. We have Jessica Reiner Harris, who is just so talented. She and I have worked together before on other shows of mine. And she's playing Joanna, Sophie's very ambitious, kind of narcissistic mother. And then we have Robin Roth playing Elizabeth, who is the Empress. And Robin brings to her this so interesting, because Elizabeth she was not mentally ill like some of her family, but she was not completely mentally healthy. And Robin brings this really a deep understanding of the imbalance of Elizabeth's nature, and the three of them together. It's just, it's intense, it's interesting, it's explosive. There's this, tension underneath everything. And that's what gives so much, why there's so much singing. That's why we decided to make it sung through, because of the intensity of the situation they're in is that intense. Our director is Joanna Syiek, and we got so lucky with her. She is the perfect person to bring to life this kind of the intersection of history, women, and rock. Our score is a pop rock score. There's a lot of I don't know, rawness. It's not raw, but they're not singing. When I would tell friends of mine that I was writing a show about Catherine the Great and it was set in 1744, they thought that we'd have like chamber music, very formal classical style. And we really wanted to go more in the direction of more like Spring Awakening, where you're contrasting, because the positions they were in needed a more explosive kind of music than a more formalized music. And that's something that Joanna understands really well. And for her to be able to tease out all of the nuances, why they're saying what they're saying when they're saying it, and how to bring across, because in a sung through, you don't have the dialogue to to help people understand. So a lot of the physical movements that the actors are doing is helping to explain all the lyrics that are just coming at you. There's a lot of lyrics, and sung through shows, often you don't get them the first time. You have to listen a second and a third time to get everything because your brain can't process it that fast. And you know that when you're writing a sung through musical, and you know that you're going to depend on the director, choreographer person to add physicality. And that's something that she just does like in her sleep. It's astounding the things she comes up with and the creativity that she brings to help bring the work through. It's been really a fantastic collaboration. What I want the audience to get out of this production, I think, is I love history. It excites me for whatever reason. And I think that I'd like people to feel that history is accessible to them, and that these women were exactly like we are today. They were just in a different position. And, I only wrote about these noble people because that's all the records we have. We don't have records of a Russian peasant in the 1740s whose family was trying to marry her off to another family because they owned a cow. It's the same story. And I think it speaks to how much those women are exactly like we are. And we live in a time where do you choose family? Do you choose to become a mother? Do you choose, I think maybe the generation before me and my generation are the first generations that didn't have to get married. We didn't have to. We didn't have to have a man. We could buy a house in our own name. We could have a credit card in our own name. We didn't need a husband to sign those things for us. And that's something that I think has been an upheaval in our society since birth control in the 60s and the feminist movement that's been happening since probably the suffrage movement. But these women, so the choice that our character who becomes Catherine, Sophie, that she has to choose what she wants. And I think that's what a lot of women, at least of my age and younger too, because you can't have everything. The women before me, a generation before me, were sort of told they could have everything. So they chose these careers, had the careers, then they had to do their career, marry, take care of the home, and then suddenly they were too old to have children. And they were all like, well, I thought I could, there were a lot of women who were born, I think, baby boomers, who ended up having that choice taken away. And what I think is interesting is that in this show, Sophie is choosing a life the way we choose lives now. Most people of that time didn't get to choose. She didn't have to marry Peter. She could have gone home to Germany. She would have married somebody else. But having the choice and not all the characters, both Joanna and Elizabeth kind of have to make peace with the life that's been forced on them. And our main character, Sophie, is the only one who chooses. So I think that's a long way of saying, I think that the audience that comes to see the show, I think everyone, I hope, will identify with all of the women or one woman in particular and feel a continuity of what the women before us did and what that enables us to do now. I think that is important because I think I think that people my age and younger take for granted, that we have choices. And I think we wouldn't have them if the women who came before us didn't fight so hard. What am I looking for when I'm in the theater watching? I'm just praying to God that what I wrote comes across, that the director gets it, that the actors get it, because I've never written book before. So I don't know if did I get this in? Did I get that in? Does that make sense? And I have no idea. It makes sense in my head, but did I get it on the page? I don't know. And so for me, I'm at the rehearsals just breathing a sigh of relief every time I see that Joanna understands what I meant, and that the actors get it. And there's this beautiful kind of, even though there's so many words in this play, there's this level of unspoken understanding that we all understand each other, that Joanna and me and Jan and Elise and Jessica and Robin, that somehow there's an unspoken understanding that's come through, and that we're all kind of riding the same wave. And that is the coolest. That's just the coolest part of collaborating. I think people should see The Path to Catherine, because Catherine the Great, at least in the Western world, I don't know how she's been written about in Russia and in the countries closer over there, but in European and all of the history that was written about her, she was portrayed so, I don't know what a word, so slanderously and almost viciously. And she's been written about by all these European men who were jealous of her power. She became very, very powerful. And she didn't, after Peter, she didn't marry. And she had relationships. She was a serial monogamist. But at the time, there's been all this stuff written about her that's just gross, and just these ridiculous, stupid men writing ridiculous, stupid, awful stuff about her. And I wanted to tell a story that was actually true. And this story that I've told is true. I haven't made up stuff. I didn't just use the name Catherine the Great and then write whatever the heck I wanted. I really wrote from all the research I did, what I could tease out as the truth of what happened. And then I contoured things a little bit to make it work in the show. But I wanted her to have her chance, to have her say, and for her to be recognized for her humanity, for her leadership, for her compassion, for the way she valued education and the arts. And somebody has to do that. And I hope it's us. I hope it's me. I hope it's all my collaborators. And I hope that everybody who comes to the show, they don't need to write plays about it, but in our lives, we can be brave and be courageous. And even if we are maligned by people who don't understand, it is worthwhile to persist. I think that's why. More voices have to be heard. More voices from our human community need to be heard in the theater, because when you're not heard, whether it's your gender or your ethnicity or your country of origin or your socioeconomic status or your gender identification, when you don't see those things portrayed, there's a an inference that you don't matter and that you don't exist, because the art that we create reflects our world. And in this show, when I thought, what would it look like if I just acted like there were no men? We have to talk about men a lot, but what if I just acted like they weren't there, the way we've had 10,000 years of men pretending, at least in the Western world, if you're not a straight, white, Christian man, your story doesn't get told because you're not important and you kind of are invisible. And being invisible is a way to take power away from people. And to be seen and heard empowers you to fulfill your potential, whatever that is to your loved ones, to your community. If you want to be on the world stage, then on the world stage, but even if it's only in your own family. Well, meeting Right Act Repertory was for me, one of the many hidden blessings of COVID. I would never have met them if it weren't for COVID, because I spent the whole lockdown getting on Zooms with people all over the country, all over the world, that I had no access to before. And Right Act, what's interesting, they're able to produce both in Los Angeles and New York. But I've been in the theater scene here in Los Angeles for well over a decade. I never met them because they're mostly in New York. But Tamra Pica got stuck here for the shutdown. But I met them through Theater Resources Unlimited, which is a New York-based community. And Bob Ost, who is the founder and the director of that organization, started doing Zooms immediately after the lockdown, like a week after the lockdown. He started doing Zooms, and somehow I heard about them. Somehow I began coming to he has a community meeting on Fridays. And through that, I just met people. And then through them, I met more people. And somehow along the way, I met John Lant and Tamra Pica. And they are perfect for us because they like to work with a developing show. Because our show, we've only had one reading. That's a very, very new show. My other shows, we've done 3, 4, 5, 6 readings. And, before you get to a point of this kind of production, and they understand very well how to move a piece from something that's still mostly living on paper to getting up on its feet and taking it to where it can go. And they both have so much experience doing that. And it's been so valuable. Again, I'll say for me as a new book writer, to have the dramaturgy that Tamra is so good at to help make the story as strong as it can be. And that has been a really powerful experience that will inform. I have another show I'm planning in my mind that's, again, 3 women. Again, it's historical. And from this experience now, it will inform how I write the next show, which will hopefully then be stronger and less bumpy than this ride has been. Well, other theater creatives, writers and directors and so forth, should get involved with Right Act Repertory, because your play on paper, your musical theater in particular, you can't create it by yourself. It is created live with all the different people. It's not like, I guess, a novel that's written with the writer and maybe an editor. And then it's finished, it's done. That's what it is. Musical theater is not. It's this choreographer contributing that, this dramaturg contributing that, these actors contributing that. And all this is after 2 years of the book writer and lyricist and composer doing all that we do. And you can't know. And then once you have it, your whole thing is in the book, you've got the score and you think, I've done it. I finished. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. It's done. And then you have a reading, and a reading, it's better than just having it in your brain and on the paper. But even a reading, you still don't see what you have, because when those actors are at their music stand with their book and there's not, even if there's blocking, you still don't know what you have. And it's for me, it's very frustrating to see almost what I think I have, but it's not quite there. And if you don't have such an opportunity like we have now to actually use Riot Act, all their resources to get it up on its feet with blocking, with choreography, with lighting, that will, help your audience understand that there was a passage of time between this scene and that scene. Those are the kind of things that if you don't get to a production at this level, you'll never know if what you wrote works. You just can't know. It's impossible. I think it's really important that the community supports Riot Act, Repertory, and other organizations that develop new work and are reaching out beyond the usual group of established New York-based writers who have controlled the musical theater world. There are a lot of other people who don't live in New York, who are not established like us. And when you don't hear those stories, you don't know those people are there. Like, I read that book, Educated. I can't think of her name right now. The story that was published maybe 3 or 4 years ago. She's a young woman now, and maybe in her late 20s, but she was raised in this fanatic Mormon household in a part of the country where they didn't live close to people. The kids didn't go to school. They were taught by their parents, and they were taught this bizarre version of history and of the world they lived in. And this was an upbringing that is so strange and so off the beaten path that you would never know. I think her name is Tara. You would never know that these people exist. These people are not people whose stories get told, but because this particular young woman is who she was, she managed to claw her way out of that world, get an education, become part of mainstream society, and tell a story that is jaw-droppingly, I don't want to say odd, but unusual. Like, the whole time I'm reading it, I was thinking, oh my God, I didn't know people like this existed. And people like this, they exist, but you don't know what it's like. You don't know what they were thinking. You just think, oh, those weirdos who do those weird things and believe these weird things. And those people exist. They're contributing to our world, whether we know it or not. And for a company like Riot Act, reaching out beyond the people who are generally allowed to tell stories gives us a fuller interpretation of our world. And in this time when we've all seen how the way the internet works and social media and the way they advertise to you, the way they follow what you're doing and then support the world you're living in, to the point that we're all living in different worlds now. We all think our world is one way. My neighbor thinks the world is a different way. And people really believe, there are people who believe with all their hearts whatever they were told by Trump, for example, where there's people who believe with all their hearts the opposite. And there doesn't seem to be a convergence. There seems like everybody's believing their own thing now. And it's desperately needed that every version of the story gets told, and that we're all open to listening to every version of people's realities. And you can't do that when you're only producing The Lion King and, these big movies made by these big corporations. That's not doing that. It's so exciting for me to bring to life these incredible women from a time and a place that we don't know, and to bring them into our world now by using language that we understand, by using music that we're used to hearing, music that speaks to us, because we have all been hearing since we were babies the music of our time. It's in you, it's in your body and your heart, even if you don't know it, because that's how music works. You hear it in a grocery store, you hear it in a restaurant, you hear it in the car, you hear it on television. You hear music and it gets in it's part of it's literally part of your physiological body. And when you hear music that is like that, rather than, for example, us playing some sort of classical chamber music, we hear less of that. So when you hear this kind of music that is more popular, that's more something that's been heard and you've internalized, it brings an identification so that you don't feel like these women are so far away from you and your experience. It makes it feel, I don't want to say like home to you, but it's familiar. And so you're able then to, if you had the idea that these women are so foreign and from hundreds of years ago, they have nothing in common with me, I think it changes that completely. I hope so. I don't have an answer for this, but at this time, Sophie is 14 and a half. And when I first was writing the show, I thought we would hire an actor who looked like 17 or 18, and we would just sort of gloss over her age, because I think it's uncomfortable for us today to think of a 14 and a half year old being married for the purpose of having a baby. There's something really creepy to us, I think, in this day and age. And I thought I could gloss over it, but Tamra Pica said, people know. All they have to do is Google it. If they don't know, we can't pretend. We know she's 14 and a half. And I think there's something that gives you this sense of urgency that you have to make decisions in your life. You have to make them when they come your way, and you don't get to choose when they come your way, and you're never ready when they come your way. It's like my friends, have always said, well, I'm going to have a baby here. I'm going to have a baby here. It's never a good time to have a baby. You've always got something else going on. But when you get pregnant, there's the baby. And that's it. That's what life handed you. And I think because she's so young, that adds to the stakes, and it makes you realize you can make those decisions too. They come at you when you least expect it. They overwhelm you with the responsibility you have and knowing that the choice you make could affect the outcome of your entire life. We've all had moments like that. And you have to make them with the tools you've got and the knowledge you've got at that moment in life. And that's true for all the women in this show. And I think that's true for every woman who will see this show and every man who will see this show. You don't get to choose when you make those decisions. I'm Patricia Zehentmayr. I'm the book writer and lyricist for The Path to Catherine, which is a new musical with 3 women. It tells the story of the teenage girl, Sophie, who will eventually become Catherine the Great, and the 3 women who shaped her. We have a fantastic cast of 3 super talented women. We're performing at the Brickhouse Theatre in North Hollywood, produced by Right Act Repertory. And we hope you will all come out and join us to see the story of how it took 3 strong women to make one great queen.